The rain-slicked streets of Eldridge Hollow gleamed under the sodium glow of streetlights, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts across the wrought-iron gates of the Hawthorne estate. It was just past midnight, the kind of hour when the world held its breath, and inside the sprawling mansion, Olivia Grant moved like a shadow herself. She was the night nurse, hired to tend to the ailing matriarch of the family, but tonight her hands trembled as she clutched a small flashlight in the darkened hallway. The air was thick with the scent of polished oak and lingering cigar smoke, but beneath it all lurked something fouler, a tension that had been building for weeks. Olivia's heart pounded as she peered through the heavy velvet curtains of the second-floor window. Below, the mansion's driveway stretched out like a black ribbon, flanked by manicured hedges that whispered in the wind. Her patient, Mrs. Eleanor Hawthorne, lay frail in her bed upstairs, but it wasn't her health that had driven Olivia to this desperate act. It was the whispers she'd overheard, the late-night meetings in the study where Alexander Hawthorne, Eleanor's son and the billionaire patriarch, brokered deals that smelled of corruption. Tonight, she'd seen too much. A hushed argument turning ugly, a subordinate dragged away after refusing to sign off on falsified documents that could ruin lives in the nearby town. Alexander's voice had been a low growl, promising ruin to anyone who crossed him. And now, with the estate's security tightening like a noose, Olivia knew she was next if she didn't act. She flicked on the flashlight, her pulse racing, and spelled out the words in Morse code against the glass, SOS, flashing it toward the road beyond the gates. The beam cut through the drizzle like a lifeline, faint but insistent. Who would see it? A passing car. No one ever came this way at this hour, but then the low rumble of a motorcycle engine pierced the night, growing louder, a solitary beast cutting through the storm. Ethan Ridge. Harlan pulled up at the edge of the property, his leather jacket slick with rain, the chrome of his Harley-Davidson glinting under the faint light. He was just passing through Eldridge Hollow on his way north, a lone rider haunted by ghosts of his own, a promise made to a dying brother in the sands of a forgotten war to protect the innocent no matter the cost. The flash caught his eye, erratic and urgent, pulling him to a stop like an invisible tether. Ethan killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the patter of rain on his helmet. He squinted through the downpour, spotting the mansion's silhouette against the stormy sky. Years on the road with the Iron Vow crew had sharpened his instincts. He'd seen signals like this before, cries for help disguised in light and shadow. Dismounting, he approached the gate, his boots crunching on gravel, the weight of his past pressing on him like the storm clouds overhead. Who was up there? Risking everything for a stranger. He scanned the windows, and there it was again, the Morse code, clearer now, pleading. Without a second thought, he pulled out his phone, snapping a quick photo of the signal, then revved his bike, just enough to draw attention, without alerting the guards patrolling the perimeter. Inside, Olivia's breath caught as she watched the biker below. He wasn't leaving. Instead, he was positioning himself, phone in hand, as if documenting the moment. Panic surged through her. Had she just pulled an innocent man into Alexander's web? The billionaire's empire was built on real estate scams and backroom bribes, devouring small businesses and families like the one she'd left behind in her own fractured past. Her own scars ran deep. A childhood promise to her late father, a cop who died exposing corruption, vowing she'd never stand by while the powerful preyed on the weak. Tonight, that vow had ignited, but now fear clawed at her. Footsteps echoed in the hall, security, coming for her after she'd lingered too long near the study. Ethan circled the gate, senses on high alert. The air carried the faint tang of expensive cologne mixed with wet earth, and he could make out the flicker in the window, a silhouette pressing against the glass. He wasn't one for charging in blind. His crew back in the valleys had taught him the value of calculated moves, of honoring the brotherhood's code, ride for those who can't. But this felt personal, stirring memories of a night much like this, when he'd failed to save a friend from a similar trap. He texted a quick message to his second-in-command, Jax, rallying the first few brothers who could mobilize. Trouble at Hawthorne Estate. Possible hostage. Gear up. Within minutes, replies buzzed back, wheels turning, engines firing up across the county. Olivia ducked away from the window as a knock rattled her door. "Miss Grant, everything all right?" The guard's voice was too smooth, laced with suspicion. She forced calm into her reply. "Just checking on Mrs. Hawthorne. She's resting." But her mind raced to the biker outside, a stranger who'd become her unwitting ally. If Alexander discovered her signal, the consequences would be swift, fired at best, silenced at worst. Yet in that moment, as thunder rolled overhead, she felt a spark of hope, the kind that promised redemption not just for her, but for the quiet victims of the Hawthorne legacy. Ethan retreated to the shadows of a nearby oak, rain dripping from his visor, watching the mansion's lights flicker on one by one. He could leave, vanish into the night like he'd done so many times before, but the signal burned in his memory. It was a call to action, echoing the oath he'd sworn over his brother's grave, to stand against the tyrants who hid behind wealth and walls. As the first distant roar of approaching bikes joined the storm, Ethan knew this ride would test everything. His loyalty, his buried pain, and the unbreakable bond of those who chose family over blood. The gates of the estate loomed like a challenge, and he was ready to answer. The convoy's engines grew louder, a thunderous promise cutting through the rain, drawing the guard's attention outward. Olivia peered out once more, her flashlight dimming but her resolve hardening. What this biker would do next would unravel the threads of power that bound her world, forcing Alexander Hawthorne to face the justice he'd long evaded. In the heart of the storm, a forgotten promise was awakening, binding strangers in a fight for honor's sake. The storm had thickened into a relentless downpour, turning the gravel driveway of Hawthorne Estate into a muddy quagmire that sucked at boot heels like reluctant confessions. Ethan Harlan crouched beneath the sprawling branches of the ancient oak, its leaves shedding water in heavy sheets that blurred the line between sky and earth. The air hummed with the scent of wet leather and ozone, a prelude to the thunder that rumbled like distant artillery. His phone vibrated in his gloved hand, Jax's reply terse and ready. 10 minutes out, bringing the essentials. Ethan nodded to himself, the weight of his brother's dog tags pressing against his chest under the soaked jacket. Those tags were a talisman, a reminder of the promise etched in blood and sand. Protect the vulnerable, no questions asked. He'd broken it once, in the chaos of a desert ambush, and the guilt had forged him into the man who rode alone until calls like this pulled him back. From his vantage, the mansion loomed like a fortress of secrets, its windows glowing with the cold light of suspicion. Guards patrolled the perimeter now, their flashlights slicing through the rain like accusatory fingers. Ethan counted 3 burly shadows in black uniforms, radios crackling with clipped commands. Alexander Hawthorne's security was no joke. Whispers in biker circles painted him as a kingpin who crushed dissent with lawyers and worse. But Ethan had faced worse in forgotten wars, where loyalty meant survival. He edged closer to the gate, the chain link rattling softly under his touch. Cold and unyielding. The Morse code had stopped, but the silhouette in the window lingered, a faint outline against the curtains. A woman, he guessed, from the graceful tension in her posture. Who was she fighting for? Herself? The old woman she'd mentioned in her brief, unseen plea. Inside, Olivia Grant pressed her back against the cool wallpaper of the upstairs hallway, her breath shallow and measured. The guard who'd knocked earlier had moved on, but his footsteps echoed in her mind like a ticking clock. The study door at the end of the hall stood ajar, spilling a sliver of lamplight onto the Persian rug. She could still hear Alexander's voice from earlier, a venomous hiss, "Sign it, or watch your world burn." The documents on his desk, forged permits for a development project that would displace half of Eldridge Hollow's families, were the poison at the heart of it all. Olivia's fingers tightened around the small vial of Mrs. Hawthorne's medication in her pocket, a mundane anchor in the chaos. Her own promise burned brighter now, unmade at her father's bedside after his unmarked grave had been filled. "Fight the shadows, live," he'd whispered, a beat cop undone by bribes he wouldn't take. She'd nodded then, a girl of 16, and carried that vow like a shield through nursing school and dead-end jobs, until this position at the estate offered a glimpse of stability. But stability had cracked tonight, revealing the rot beneath. A low growl pierced the storm, the first of the bikes arriving, not a full convoy yet, but enough to stir the guards into motion. Olivia risked another glance out the window, her heart leaping as she saw the biker, Ridge, she'd later learn his road name, signal subtly with a tilt of his head. 2 more riders pulled up behind him, their Harleys idling like watchful predators, headlights cutting fog-shrouded beams across the gates. They weren't charging in, no. These men moved with the precision of a pack that knew the cost of rashness. One dismounted, a broad-shouldered figure with a faded tattoo peeking from his sleeve, an iron vow etched in ink, symbolizing bonds forged in fire. Olivia's pulse quickened. She'd heard tales of such crews, guardians on the fringes who answered calls the law ignored. Ethan met Jax's gaze as his second-in-command swung off his bike, rain streaming down his weathered face. Jax was the steady one, a former mechanic who'd patched more than engines in their brotherhood, souls scarred by loss, like Ethan's own. "What's the play?" Jax murmured, voice low against the wind. Ethan jerked his chin toward the window. "Signal from inside. Nurse, maybe. Hawthorne's got dirt on the town. Evictions, bribes. She's calling it out." Jax's eyes narrowed, the rain tracing paths down his beard. He'd lost a sister to a similar scheme years back, a family farm swallowed by developers. "We ride for her then, but smart, no guns, just presence." They nodded, an unspoken pact, sealing the moment. Ethan pulled a small recorder from his saddlebag, hitting record as he approached the gate again, his voice steady. "This is Ethan Harlan. Saw the signal. If you're in trouble, blink your light twice." The words were for proof, a digital trail against the powerful. Upstairs, Olivia's hands shook as she retrieved the flashlight, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and defiance. The guards were converging now, their voices rising in alarm at the intruders. She flicked the beam twice. Yes, trouble, then twice more, a silent thank you. The biker below nodded, his face half-shadowed but resolute, and in that exchange something shifted. Not just alliance, but recognition. 2 souls bound by old oaths, facing a Goliath of wealth and lies. Alexander's empire thrived on isolation, on silencing voices like hers, but this intrusion was a crack in the facade. She could hear him now bellowing from the study, "Get them off my property!" Footsteps thundered up the stairs, and Olivia slipped into Mrs. Hawthorne's room, the frail woman stirring faintly under the covers. "It's all right, ma'am," she whispered, though her own fear coiled tight. The matriarch's eyes fluttered open, wise and weary. "The light. You did right, child." Words from a woman who'd long suspected her son's shadows, her own regrets a mirror to Olivia's. Outside, the convoy swelled. 5 bikes now, then 7, engines harmonizing into a defiant roar that drowned the storm. Ethan mounted up, the vibration thrumming through him like renewed purpose. They wouldn't storm the gates, that wasn't their way. Instead, they'd circle, document, call in favors from old contacts, sheriffs with grudges, reporters hungry for truth. Jax revved beside him, the air electric with the scent of exhaust and resolve. "For the promise," Jax said, and Ethan echoed it, the words of vow against the night. The guards hesitated at the gate, radios buzzing with uncertainty, as the bikers formed a loose perimeter, headlights illuminating the estate like a spotlight on hidden sins. Olivia watched from the window, the room now alive with tension, as security burst in. "Miss Grant, step away," one demanded, but her chin lifted, the nurse's calm masking the fire within. The biker's presence bought her time, a buffer against the inevitable confrontation. Alexander would regret this night, not for the intrusion, but for awakening forces he couldn't buy or bully. In the downpour, as lightning forked the sky, Ethan led the first slow loop around the property, the rumble a promise of justice unfolding. Old wounds ached, but so did hope, binding them all in a ride toward redemption's dawn. The mansion's lights blazed brighter, but shadows lengthened, hinting at the unraveling to come. The rain hammered down like judgment from the heavens, turning the Hawthorne estate into a besieged island amid the storm's fury. Ethan Harlan leaned into the turn as his Harley sliced through the downpour, the engine's growl a steady counterpoint to the thunder's erratic booms. Water sluiced off his helmet in rivulets, blurring his vision. But he didn't slow. Behind him, the growing line of bikes, now a dozen strong, formed a rolling barricade, their headlights piercing the night like accusatory eyes fixed on the mansion's facade. Jax rode flank, his massive frame hunched over the handlebars, the ink of their shared vow tattoo glistening on his exposed forearm as rain washed away the grime of the road. These weren't outlaws seeking chaos, they were sentinels, bound by oaths older than the scars they carried, answering a silent cry that echoed their own buried pains. Ethan's mind raced with fragments of the past as he circled the perimeter fence, the chain link humming under the vibration of passing tires. He remembered the desert heat, the acrid bite of sand in his throat, and his brother Lucas's final gasp, "Promise me, Ridge, stand for the ones who can't." Lucas had been the medic in their unit, patching wounds with steady hands until a sniper's round ended it all. Ethan had carried that failure like a chain, riding solo for years, until the Iron Vow Brotherhood pulled him into their fold, a family forged in loss, where loyalty wasn't given but earned in the fire of shared trials. Tonight, the nurse's signal had reignited that flame, pulling him and his crew into a fray against a man whose wealth bought silence but couldn't drown out the rumble of justice on two wheels. From the mansion's grand portico, Alexander Hawthorne stormed out into the deluge, his tailored suit clinging like a second skin, face twisted in rage that the storm seemed to mock. Umbrellas bobbed futilely around him as guards flanked his sides, their pistols holstered but hands twitching toward them. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed, voice cutting through the roar of engines like a blade. Spotlights from the estate's eaves snapped on, bathing the bikers in harsh white light, turning raindrops into shimmering veils. Alexander's empire, built on land grabs that left families homeless and officials in his pocket, tolerated no threats, especially not from leather-clad phantoms at his gate. He'd crushed unions and whistleblowers before, but this felt different, primal, like the wild, reclaiming what civilization had stolen. Inside, Olivia Grant stood her ground in Mrs. Hawthorne's dimly lit chamber, the air heavy with the scent of lavender sachets and medicinal tinctures. The frail matriarch gripped her hand, eyes sharp despite the pain etching her features. "Don't let him break you, dear," Eleanor whispered, her voice a fragile thread woven from decades of quiet complicity and regret. She'd turned a blind eye to her son's dealings for too long, trading her conscience for the illusion of family legacy. But Olivia's defiance stirred something dormant, a mother's instinct to protect what little honor remained. The door burst open, and two guards filled the frame, their boots tracking mud across the antique rug. "Mr. Hawthorne wants you in the study. Now," the lead one growled, his gaze sweeping the room like a searchlight. Olivia's heart thundered, but she met his eyes steadily, the vial of medication still clutched in her fist like a talisman. "I'm tending to my patient. You know the rules." Her voice held the calm of someone who'd stared down loss before. Her father's funeral, the empty chair at holidays, the vow she'd made to expose the corruption that claimed him. The guards advanced, but a distant clamor from below halted them. The bikers' engines revving in unison, a coordinated surge that shook the windows. Olivia glanced out, seeing the convoy tighten its loop, shadows merging into a wall of resolve. The lead biker, Ridge, as she'd overheard one guard mutter into his radio, pulled to the forefront, dismounting with deliberate slowness, his recorder held high like a banner. Ethan faced the gate, rain cascading from his broad shoulders, the dog tags cold against his skin. "We're not here for trouble," he called out, voice amplified by the storm, yet carrying the weight of authenticity. "Just answers. Saw the signal from inside. If someone's in danger, we ride for them." The guards shifted uneasily, their radios crackling with Alexander's frantic orders. "Detain them! Call the sheriff! My sheriff!" But Ethan knew the type. Bought loyalty crumbled under scrutiny. He hit play on the recorder, letting the earlier message echo, the plea, the confirmation blink. Jax and the others held position, engines idling low, a symphony of restraint that spoke louder than any shout. One rider, a wiry veteran named Samuel with a prosthetic leg from the same war that haunted Ethan, unrolled a banner from his bike, simple white cloth scrawled with "Iron Vow." For the voiceless, snapping it taut in the wind, Alexander shoved past his men, striding to the gate, face purpled with fury. "You trespass on private property. I'll have you arrested, thrown in cells deeper than your pathetic club runs." Spittle flew from his lips, mixing with rain, but Ethan's gaze didn't waver. He'd seen tyrants like this in boardrooms disguised as war zones. Men who wielded power like a weapon because they feared the quiet strength of those who had nothing left to lose. "Private? When it hides harm, we got eyes on the signal, and now the world's gonna hear it." He tapped his phone, already uploading the photo to a secure channel, pinging contacts in the press who'd owed favors since a Brotherhood ride exposed a corrupt mill owner years back. The first shares rippled out, anonymous tips to local outlets framing the Hawthorne name in questions of coercion and shadows. Upstairs, the guards hesitated as Olivia's phone buzzed in her pocket. A burner she'd hidden, now alive with notifications from an unknown ally. She slipped it out, glimpsing the upload, her signal documented, spreading like wildfire through the digital ether. "Move," the guard snapped, but Eleanor sat up straighter, her voice cutting through. "Leave her be, or I'll call my own people, the board, the real ones." The matriarch's influence lingered, a ghost of the Hawthorne fortune's origins, before Alexander twisted it into something venomous. The men backed off a step, uncertainty flickering in their eyes as the convoy's roar swelled, more bikes joining from the county's backroads. 20 now, a testament to the vow's reach. Olivia stepped into the hall, pulse steadying as she descended the grand staircase, the mansion's opulence mocking her resolve. Alexander whirled at her approach through the rain-streaked glass doors, his roar turning on her. "You! This is your doing!" But the words caught in his throat as the biker's lights bathed him, the banner unfurling fully now, a silent indictment. Ethan's crew didn't advance. They encircled, a living testament to chosen family, their presence eroding the billionaire's isolation like waves on a crumbling shore. Jax leaned toward Ethan, murmuring, "Sheriff's en route. Ours, not his." A contact from the Brotherhood, a deputy scarred by Hawthorne's bribes, had flipped the script. In that charged standoff, Olivia pushed open the door, stepping into the storm, rain soaking her scrubs as she met Ethan's eyes across the divide. No words passed, but the nod exchanged was a pact, her promise aligning with his, two threads weaving into a rope strong enough to pull down empires built on lies. Alexander's face drained of color, the regret dawning as flashes from distant news vans pierced the horizon. The night wasn't over, but the tide had turned, honor's quiet force awakening against the roar of corruption. Thunder clapped, sealing the moment, as the ride toward reckoning gained momentum, binding strangers in redemption's unyielding grip. The storm's fury showed no signs of abating, sheets of rain lashing the Hawthorne estate like a divine scourge, turning the manicured lawns into slick fields of mud that mirrored the shifting sands of alliances below. Olivia Grant stood on the threshold, the chill wind whipping through her soaked scrubs, clinging to her skin like the weight of unspoken truths. Her eyes locked with Ethan's across the wrought iron gate, a silent current passing between them. Two strangers, forged in the fires of personal vows, now standing against the gale of one man's greed. The air crackled with the scent of wet asphalt and revving engines, the Iron Vow crew's bikes forming an unbreachable ring, their headlights casting elongated shadows that danced mockingly at Alexander Hawthorne's feet. Alexander's face, illuminated by the erratic flashes of lightning, twisted into a mask of disbelief and dawning fury. He jabbed a finger toward Olivia, water streaming from his disheveled hair, his voice a thunderous bark that barely cut through the din. "You traitorous little, get back inside. This is my home, my rules." But the words rang hollow, undercut by the growing hum of activity beyond the estate's walls. Sirens wailed in the distance, not the sheriff's bought-in forces, but an independent response team, alerted by Ethan's digital breadcrumbs, tips fed to a network of watchdogs who'd long chafed under Hawthorne's thumb. The Billionaire's empire, a labyrinth of shell companies and coerced signatures, was fracturing under the spotlight of exposure. Ethan dismounted fully now, his boots sinking into the sodden earth as he approached the gate with measured steps, the recorder still clutched in one hand like a relic of accountability. Jax and Samuel flanked him, their presence a wall of quiet solidarity, the Iron Vow banner snapping defiantly in the gusts. Ethan's own scars itched under the rain's assault, a jagged line across his ribs from that fateful desert night. A reminder of Lucas's last breath and the promise that had kept him riding ever since. "We're not your enemies unless you make us," he said, his tone even, carrying the gravelly timbre of a man who'd stared down worse than corporate kings. "But that signal, it called us, and we answer." The words hung in the air, laced with the moral weight of oaths unbroken, stirring something in the guards who shifted uncomfortably, their loyalty to paychecks wavering in the face of this unforeseen tide. Olivia took a step forward, ignoring the guard's half-hearted grab at her arm, her voice rising clear and unyielding. "It's over, Mr. Hawthorne. The documents, the threats, they're out there now. Families in Eldridge Hollow won't lose their homes because of your schemes." Her promise to her father pulsed like a heartbeat, the memory of his weary smile fueling her. She'd bandaged wounds in emergency rooms, held hands through grief. But this was her stand, a nurse's oath extended beyond the bedside into the shadows of power. Mrs. Eleanor watched from the mansion's doorway, propped on a cane, her frail form a poignant counterpoint to her son's bluster. "Alexander," she called softly, the first crack in her silence. "Enough. For once, let the truth breathe." The convoy's engines idled in a low, ominous chorus, more riders arriving by the minute, veterans from dusty rallies, mechanics with calloused hands, even a few off-duty first responders who'd heard the call through brotherhood channels. They weren't an army. They were a family, chosen in the crucible of loss, their leathers etched with symbols of endurance, iron fists clasped in unity, vows inked over faded tattoos from wars both foreign and domestic. Samuel, the wiry one with the prosthetic, leaned toward Ethan, murmuring, Press is here. Saw the vans turning off the highway. Ethan nodded, the pieces aligning like gears in a well-oiled machine. His phone buzzed again. Confirmations from the uploads, shares multiplying as the story broke. Mystery signal at Billionaire's mansion sparks corruption probe. Alexander whirled on his guards, desperation edging his commands. Secure the perimeter, shut this down. But the men hesitated, eyes darting to the approaching lights, news crews spilling out of vehicles, cameras hungry for the unraveling. One guard, a younger man with a family in the hollow, lowered his weapon subtly, the moral compass he'd buried resurfacing. The billionaire's regret crystallized in that moment, his carefully constructed world of influence crumbling not with a bang, but with the persistent drip of rain and the unyielding gaze of those he'd overlooked. He'd dismissed the bikers as riffraff, the nurse as expendable, but in awakening their resolve, he'd summoned a force rooted in honor's quiet power, one that no fortune could buy off. Olivia crossed the driveway, her steps deliberate through the muck, closing the distance to the gate where Ethan waited. Up close, she saw the lines etched around his eyes, the dog tags glinting faintly, a veteran's burden matching her own. "Thank you," she said simply, the words carrying the depth of redemption found in alliance. Ethan inclined his head, a faint smile breaking through the storm's grim veil. Promises kept, that's all. Behind them, Jacks coordinated with arriving allies, voices low and efficient. Calls to ethical investigators, whispers to displaced families ready to testify. The Iron Vow wasn't about vengeance, it was poetic justice, the slow erosion of corruption through truth's relentless light. As the first reporter breached the outer line, microphone thrust forward, Alexander retreated toward the mansion, his shoulders slumping under the weight of inevitability. The guards stood down, one by one, the air shifting from confrontation to revelation. Thunder rolled once more, but it felt like applause now, echoing the catharsis of vows honored. Olivia glanced back at the estate, her patient's knowing nod a balm to the chaos. In this chosen family of riders and healers, redemption wasn't a solitary path. It was a ride shared, binding wounds into strength. The night stretched on, but the dawn promised clarity. Hawthorne's regret a seed planted in the fertile ground of accountability. The standoff evolved into a vigil as dawn's first grey light pierced the clouds, the rain easing to a misty veil that softened the estate's harsh edges. Ethan and his crew held their positions, a circle of guardianship that spoke volumes without a single raised voice. Olivia, now safely beyond the gate, shared fragments of the truth with the reporters, hints of forged papers, coerced silences, her words measured, her nurse's poise turning testimony into testimony of the soul. Alexander watched from the shadows of the portico, the empire he'd built on sand slipping away, his regret a bitter tide washing over him. What this biker had done wasn't destruction, it was awakening, a promise fulfilled that rippled far beyond the hollow, mending the fractures of trust, one honorable stand at a time. If this story of quiet courage and unbreakable bonds is touching your heart, hit that like button now. It helps spread these tales of redemption to more riders on the road. The first hints of dawn crept over the jagged horizon of Eldridge Hollow, painting the sky in muted strokes of silver and rose, as if the storm itself were yielding to a reluctant truce. The rain had dwindled to a fine mist that hung in the air like unresolved whispers, cloaking the Hawthorne estate in an ethereal haze. Ethan Harlan stood at the gate's edge, his leather jacket heavy with moisture, the faint creak of settling gravel under his boots, the only sound breaking the hush. The Iron Vow crew had formed a loose semicircle now, their bikes parked in sentinel rows, engines cooling with soft ticks that echoed like fading heartbeats. Jax wiped rain from his brow, his eyes scanning the arriving news vans, their antennas slicing the mist like probing fingers. "It's spreading," he said quietly, nodding toward a reporter murmuring into a microphone, the glow of her phone screen illuminating words that would soon echo across the county. Olivia Grant, huddled under a borrowed poncho from one of the riders, her scrub still damp and clinging, but her posture straight as the first rays touched the estate's spires. The air carried the fresh, mineral tang of wet soil mingled with the acrid bite of exhaust, a sensory bridge between the night's fury and this fragile morning. She'd spoken in measured tones to the journalists, recounting the signal's desperation without naming names at first. Hints of shadowed dealings, of lives upended by unchecked ambition. Her voice, steady as a healer's hand, wove the moral thread. A promise to safeguard the vulnerable, born from her father's quiet stand against the very corruption that now threatened the Hollow. Reporters leaned in, notebooks flashing in the low light, their questions pulling at the edges of Alexander Hawthorne's carefully guarded facade. From the mansion's shadowed portico, Alexander paced like a caged predator, his silk tie askew, the once impeccable suit now rumpled and stained. The regret gnawed at him, a slow burn in his chest as he watched the scene unfold, his guards milling uncertainly, their radios silent for the first time in hours. He'd built this empire on calculated risks, on silencing echoes before they amplified, but the biker's intervention had ignited a chain he couldn't contain. Whispers from his study earlier that night replayed in his mind, the forged permits for the development that would raise family homes, the subordinates' refusal met with veiled threats. Now those documents were likely being sifted through by unseen hands, tipped off by the digital trail Ethan had laid. Alexander's fists clenched, the cool mist beading on his skin like unshed tears of realization. He dismissed the nurse as a mere servant, the riders as transient noise, but their unity exposed the hollowness of his power, brought alliances crumbling under the weight of authentic bonds. Ethan felt the pull of the moment, a quiet surge of purpose that eased the ache in his shoulders. Lucas's dog tags shifted against his chest, warm now from his body heat. A talisman, reminding him of sands where promises were forged in the crucible of loss. He'd ridden alone for too long, evading the Brotherhood's full embrace after that desert failure, but this call had drawn him back, binding him to Olivia's resolve like iron links. He turned to her, voice low amid the murmur of gathering crowds. "You started this light. We just carried it." Olivia met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the dawn's soft glow, the shared weight of old vows lightening in the exchange. "And it reached further than I dreamed," she replied, her words carrying the emotional gravity of redemption's first breath. Around them, the crew stirred. Samuel adjusting his prosthetic with a practiced motion, Jax coordinating with a deputy who'd arrived in an unmarked cruiser. His badge, a symbol of reclaimed integrity. The estate's gates creaked open slightly, not in invitation, but under the press of curiosity from within. Mrs. Eleanor Hawthorne emerged, leaning on her cane, her silver hair framing a face etched with quiet sorrow. The mist swirled around her like a veil, the scent of her lavender perfume cutting through the earthy dampness. She moved with deliberate grace, ignoring Alexander's hissed protest from the shadows. "Let it end here," she said to the air, her voice frail yet resonant, addressing the reporters as much as her son. Eleanor's own regrets surfaced now, a lifetime of averted eyes, trading family honor for illusory security. But seeing Olivia's stand and the rider's unyielding circle stirred a dormant fire. "The Hawthorne name was meant for building, not breaking," she continued, her words a poetic justice that hung heavy, forcing Alexander to confront the legacy he'd poisoned. Reporters surged forward, cameras clicking like mechanical heartbeats, capturing the matriarch's confession in fragments, admissions of overlooked signs of a son's descent into shadows. Alexander stepped into the light at last, his face a storm cloud amid the clearing sky, the billionaire's armor cracking under the moral onslaught. "This is a misunderstanding," he began, but the words faltered, drowned by a rider's engine revving softly in support, a reminder of the presence that had shifted the balance. Ethan's phone buzzed with updates. Investigators en route. Families from the Hollow gathering testimonies, the Iron Vows network amplifying the truth like echoes in a canyon. The crew didn't cheer. They stood firm, their silence a testament to lealdad inconditional, the chosen family that turned individual scars into collective strength. Olivia felt the tension coil anew as Alexander's eyes locked on her, a flicker of desperate calculation crossing his features. He approached the gate, guards trailing like reluctant shadows, his voice dropping to a conciliatory murmur. "Miss Grant, we can talk this out, inside, away from this circus." But the offer rang false, laced with the same coercion that had driven her to the window. She shook her head, the mist dampening her lashes, her resolve a quiet force. "No more closed doors, Mr. Hawthorne. The light's out now." Ethan placed a steadying hand on the gate, his presence a buffer, the dog tags catching the light as a symbol of oaths that outlasted tempests. Jax murmured coordinates to the deputy, ensuring safe passage for any who wished to speak freely. As the sun crested fully, bathing the estate in golden hues that chased away the last veils of mist, the air hummed with possibility. News vans multiplied, their antennas a forest against the sky, broadcasting snippets that would unravel Hawthorne's web thread by thread. Alexander retreated once more, the weight of impending scrutiny bowing his shoulders, his regret manifesting in the hollow echo of his footsteps on the portico. The billionaire who'd once commanded rooms with a glance now faced the justice of the overlooked, a poetic reckoning where honor's subtle power eclipsed fleeting wealth. Ethan mounted his bike, the familiar vibration thrumming through him like renewed life, signaling the crew to prepare for the next phase. Escorting witnesses, safeguarding the Hollow's heart. Olivia climbed onto a spare ride behind Samuel, her hands gripping the worn leather, the wind's promise carrying her forward. In this dawn of accountability, their paths converged not by chance, but by the unbreakable pull of promises kept, family chosen in the quiet spaces between storms, redemption unfolding in the ride ahead. The engines stirred to life, a harmonious rumble that blended with the awakening world, hinting at the final stand where truths would fully bloom. The sun climbed higher over Eldridge Hollow, its rays filtering through the thinning mist like fingers of reluctant forgiveness, casting a warm glow on the Hawthorne estate's weathered stone walls. The air hummed with the low thrum of idling engines, a symphony of resolve that blended with the distant calls of awakening birds and the murmur of gathered voices. Ethan Harlan gripped the handlebars of his Harley, the leather warm under his palms now, the vibration a steady pulse, syncing with his heartbeat. The Iron Vow crew formed up behind him, a phalanx of shadowed figures emerging into the light, leathers drying in the breeze, faces etched with the quiet satisfaction of oaths fulfilled. Jax revved once, a signal rippling through the line, while Samuel adjusted Olivia's position behind him on the spare bike, his prosthetic legs steady as they prepared to roll out. The scent of damp earth and cooling exhaust lingered, a tangible reminder of the night's trials yielding to this dawn of reckoning. Olivia clung to Samuel's waist, the wind tugging at her damp hair as the convoy began its slow procession down the estate's long driveway. Her mind replayed the signal's faint Morse code, a desperate spark that had bridged her isolation to this unbreakable chain of riders. The promise to her father felt lighter now, not a burden but a beacon, guiding her through the moral labyrinth of the Hawthorne legacy. Below on the muddy path, reporters parted like waves before a prow, their cameras capturing the exodus, not as defeat, but as a dignified withdrawal pregnant with consequence. Alexander Hawthorne stood frozen on the portico, his silhouette stark against the mansion's grandeur, the mist curling around him like unraveling secrets. His eyes followed the bikes, the regret etching deeper lines into his face, a silent admission that the walls he'd built couldn't contain the truth's inevitable breach. As the gates swung wide under the deputy's watchful eye, the convoy merged onto the rain-slicked road leading into the hollow, tires humming over puddles that reflected the sky's clearing blue. Ethan led the way, his thoughts drifting to Lucas's last moments, the hot desert wind carrying his brother's plea, a vow etched into Ethan's soul like the ink on his arm. He'd evaded full commitment to the Brotherhood for years, haunted by that failure, but this ride had mended the fracture. The crew wasn't just allies, they were kin, chosen in the forge of shared scars. Their loyalty, a quiet force that outshone the flash of wealth. Jax rode close, his voice cutting through the wind via helmet comms. Families are waiting at the community hall. They'll need to hear this from her. Ethan nodded, the road unfolding before them like a path to poetic justice where the voiceless found amplification in the rumble of engines. In the hollow's heart, the small town square bustled with early risers drawn by whispers of the night's drama, shopkeepers wiping windows, families clustering under awnings still dripping from the storm. The convoy pulled in with a controlled roar, drawing gasps and nods of recognition from those who'd suffered Hawthorne's encroachments. Olivia dismounted first, her legs steady despite the chill, and stepped into the circle of light where a makeshift gathering formed. The air here carried the comforting aroma of fresh coffee from a nearby diner, mingling with the faint, hopeful scent of blooming jasmine along the fences. She addressed them not with speeches, but with the raw honesty of a nurse who'd bandaged more than bodies. Tales of the forged documents, the threats veiled in boardroom silk, her signal a cry for the homes and histories at stake, faces hardened into resolve, hands clasping in solidarity, the moral weight of her words weaving a tapestry of communal strength. Ethan watched from the sidelines, leaning against his bike, the sun warming the chrome as it dried the last traces of rain. Samuel joined him, clapping a hand on his shoulder, the gesture heavy with unspoken brotherhood. "You pulled us in, Ridge, like Lucas would have wanted." The words stirred the dog tags against Ethan's chest, a cool reminder turning warm in the light. He'd honored the promise at last, not through vengeance, but by standing sentinel, allowing truth to unfold its quiet power. Jax coordinated with the deputy, now fully aligned. As investigators arrived in unmarked sedans, ethical agents untainted by Hawthorne's reach, notebooks ready for the flood of testimonies. The Hollow's people stepped forward one by one, a widow whose farm edged the proposed development, a mechanic squeezed out by rigged bids, their stories interlocking like gears in a machine of accountability. Back at the estate, the unraveling accelerated. Mrs. Eleanor's voice, frail yet firm, guided the reporters through the mansion's echoing halls, unveiling ledgers tucked in hidden drawers, proof of bribes that had silenced officials, displaced dreams turned to dust. Alexander retreated to his study, the room that had once been his throne, now a cage of echoing regrets. The billionaire who'd commanded empires with a whisper now faced the mirror of his choices, a son who'd traded family honor for fleeting gain, leaving scars on the very community that sustained him. His hands trembled as he dialed lawyers, but the lines buzzed with questions from within, alliances fracturing like brittle glass. The matriarch's stand, inspired by Olivia's light, marked the turning point, a mother's redemption mirroring the nurse's, binding generations in a legacy reclaimed. As midday sun bathed the square in golden clarity, Olivia concluded her account, the crowd's murmurs rising into a chorus of gratitude. Ethan approached, offering a nod that spoke volumes, their paths, once solitary, now intertwined in this chosen family of riders and survivors. "The ride continues," he said simply, the words of vow extended, inviting her into the fold where promises endured beyond the road. She smiled faintly, the weight of her father's memory settling into peace, the justice she'd sought blooming in these human connections. The crew mounted up once more, engines harmonizing as they escorted the first witnesses to safety. Their departure a rumble of enduring loyalty, leaving the hollow fortified against shadows. In the days that followed, the headlines spread like wildfire across the valleys. Hawthorne's empire scrutinized, developments halted, families restored to their roots. Alexander faced inquiries not with bluster, but with the quiet surrender of a man confronting his hollow core, his regret a catalyst for change, philanthropy born of necessity, but seeded in truth's unyielding light. Olivia returned to her duties, but with allies now, her nursing a bridge between healing bodies and mending societies. Ethan rode on, the iron vow stronger, Lucas's promise alive in every turn of the wheel. Through it all, the bond forged that stormy night endured, a testament to redemption's quiet grace, where a single signal sparked a symphony of honor, proving that in a world of cynics, loyalty's rumble could reshape horizons. The hollow breathed easier, its people standing taller, bound by the unbreakable threads of chosen family and promises that outlasted tempests. Thank you for riding along on this journey of courage and unbreakable bonds. If these stories of redemption touch your soul, please subscribe for more tales that honor the quiet heroes among us. We'd love to have you in our crew.